Hold on. There we go. Okay. So this is the talk I'm going to be giving at Stellafane this year because it's the 100th year. First Stellafane, first meeting was 1923, and here we are 100 years later. Stellafane is the original star party. All the others across the country came after and try to copy it, but it's still the first. And I think it's one of the only ones that still is amateur based, meaning no commercial displays. So they're staying true to their heritage. And it came about because of, there was a group of people, but the primary mover was Russell Porter, and he had an incredibly remarkable life. And that's what I'm going to talk about, Russell Porter. In fact, for the meeting, I'm on the Centennial Committee for Stellafane. I've been a member of Stellafane for, 50 years now. My first Stellafane was 1969. I missed medical school and residency, but other than that, been going pretty much every year. It's a large gathering. It started off for telescope making, and that's still its focus. People bring their telescopes and try to win an award, unlike many other star parties where people bring commercial telescopes. And it's 2 to 3 nights of gazing at the stars, a large star party. And there are some good talks. I invite you all to come this year because it's the 100th year. We're going to have a gala celebration. And because I'm the MC, I've been the MC now for a couple of years, but they've asked me to continue doing that. And this year I'm going to dress up as Russell Porter. So my gig is going to be, in addition to giving a talk, I will basically have him invade my body, and I will be talking as if I'm Russell Porter through much of the weekend and during the festivities. So, who's Russell Porter? Born in 1871, died in 1949, and he had a remarkable life. This is Russell Porter as a young man. Now, I noticed that even as a young man, and I don't know if he's like 10 or 12 years old here, tie and jacket. And you'll see that no matter what he's doing, fixing a road, digging a ditch, grinding a telescope mirror. It's amazing how people dressed back then. We've really let ourselves down since then. So here he is as a young man. I'm not sure the date of this photo. I think it's when he first started college. Here's his family in 1899, just as he was starting college. I'm not sure if he's actually in this photo. But here he is at MIT. He started off at Norwich University in Vermont, engineering. The following year, transferred to University of Vermont, and a year and a half, I believe, there, but had to drop out because his father couldn't afford the tuition payments. He apparently lost his job. So he moved to Boston, believe it or not, and worked, and then managed to get into MIT, where he got his architectural degree. So he's an engineer and an architect, and you're going to see proof of that throughout the following photos. While at MIT, he listened to lectures by Robert Peary, the Arctic explorer, who came to MIT and gave a couple of lectures about Arctic conditions. He was intrigued by that, so he decided to go on several expeditions, and this took him from 1893 to 1906. He went through 9 Arctic voyages with either Peary, Fred Cook, or William Ziegler in different Arctic expeditions. And interestingly, his job was as an artist and surveyor using his engineering skills, and a navigator using his astronomical knowledge. Specifically, his job in the evening was to do a transit of a star so they could reset the chronometer, because they weren't all that accurate back then, and they used transits to reset the clock. So those were his duties back then. And as you can see, he did numerous journeys, primarily around England, Greenland in the early years, and then a couple of voyages up to the Arctic, one of which the ship got stuck in the ice and they had to winter over with a crushed hull, but he survived that. And then his last one was in 1906, he went to Mount McKinley and surveyed 3,000 square miles. And I'll show you some images of that. So here's the ship Diana, 1900 of Greenland with Peary. So what conditions were like in Greenland. And many of his, one thing about, he was an incredible artist. And in addition to his surveying work and architectural skills, he learned how to do paintings very well. So a lot of these paintings are now in the National Archives. If you ever go to the National Mall and the Native American exhibition, many of those paintings are his, and they've taken them over and the collection belongs to the National Archives now. So here's Greenland in 1900. He took photos and did paintings. Here he is on a dog sled. That's him as a young man over here doing surveying work. And he did paintings. Everywhere he went, he did paintings of his surroundings. So here's his painting of 3 Eskimos in kayaks in Greenland. Paintings of his dogs. Painting of building an igloo. Incredibly historic. Painting of scaring off a polar bear. And here's a photo of a native Eskimo in Greenland. Here's the Tromsø when he went to Norway, northern, along the Arctic, along the Norway coast. And then the SS Hope, I think it was, and the ship was caught in ice and crushed and had to winter over. And then finally, one of his last expedition was to Mount McKinley. He has a famous painting of Mount McKinley that he made, and that's also in the National Archives. So he then went to, when he finished with the Arctic Explorers, he did a little bit of journeying, went to Switzerland, and this is Junhof, I believe, in Switzerland near Interlaken. So you'd think with that kind of long series of expeditions, that would be his life's work. But he then switched tracks. He was done with the Arctic expeditions, and he decided to start a colony in Maine, Port Richey. And the purpose of that was to bring artists and engineers together, and they were going to invent things and have a colony of people who would think about new things. So here's the house that he designed all the cottages. So here was his cottage there. He designed it and built it. Here's a painting of him in his porch. He had a small telescope back then, but he started building telescopes while he was there. Again, he was always interested in astronomy, and he decided that buying it back then, if you were an amateur astronomer, you basically had to send away to England for a telescope, or you had to buy them from someone like Brashear or very expensive makers in the US. No one could afford them, certainly not the average person, and not someone who was just interested in astronomy like we were. Here's another cottage he designed and built, and people bought these. This was known as the castle, and this was for visitors to the colony. And several of these are still standing, and this one is the Belfast Church that he designed and had built, and it's still standing over there. So he left a mark in Port Richey, and while he was there, he, well, later throughout life, he designed little statuettes and of his time. So here's 1940, but it's him sitting measuring a telescope mirror, the focus, and you can see the pitch lap for the grinding and polishing. Here he is amateur telescope making in a dish. notice the central, I forgot I have my pointer here. Here he is looking through a telescope, and here is the mirror, what it would look like in a focal tester. Okay, so he used his knowledge of telescope making and put it into his designs. Here is a I'm sorry, I'm blocking on a time measurement for time measurement, of course, with the solar. And he designed many of these. This one is a dolphin. This one is has a built-in clock that gets reset. And here is a different design, which includes the analemma. So he was quite inventive throughout his life. And while at Port Richey, he had, they did music, and he wrote songs of different things, including the sky. So I'm just going to move this so I can read. So back in 1919, even though this was going well, he was invited back to go back to Springfield by James Harkness. James Harkness at the time was the CEO of Jones and Lamson in Springfield. Now, back then, in order to make precision gears, you needed lots of water power. We didn't have diesel and steam engines. The water power is why it got built in northern New England in many cities. Springfield became the center in the United States for building precision instruments and gears. James Harkness was the owner of one of these companies. There were three of them in Springfield, Jones and Lamson. And he also was governor of Vermont, who had a telescope built into his house back then. So he knew Porter quite well and lured him back with a job at James and Lamson with a good salary, and he wanted him to develop what's called an optical comparator. Basically, it was an optical instrument in order to measure precisely the gears and the equipment that Jones and Lamson was building. And within a couple of years, he developed it, and Jones and Lamson, and he had a patent on it. And that's how they made even more precise instruments. Their gears were sent worldwide. So with such a collection of engineers and precision making people, by the way, that's his wife. I'm not sure who this is, probably his daughter, but I'm not sure. Anyways, that's his wife, Alice, and that's Russell Porter around 1919. So while he was there, Harkness had an interest in astronomy. Porter had an interest in astronomy and had developed skills for grinding mirrors. He had a 6-inch and got two 16-inch blanks from the Bashir Company before he moved to Vermont, and wanted to start grinding them. But he let people know about this, and he decided to teach people how to make telescopes. Remember, back then, you wanted a telescope, you shipped it from England, or you bought it from some very expensive companies in the US. Very few companies in the US made them. So people at James and Lamson were interested in doing this with him. So he set up a class, and here are the first meeting of the telescope makers. This is 1920. Right here, August 17th. And here are the people who joined in. They were all gear makers or engineers at James and Lamson. And there was one Gladys Piper, a woman, who was a school teacher who wanted to join in. And she was the first woman who, these are the telescopes they made, or worked on at that time, but they eventually made them. So here is the initial class of telescope makers. All right, this is where it all began. Notice people dressed rather nicely back then. I can't find an image of Russell Porter who's not in a tie, white shirt, and jacket, a three-piece suit. and everyone is dressed the same way. She is a school teacher. Everyone else worked at James and Lamson, which is in the building behind him. Notice he's got a mirror, a telescope mirror in his hand. And here he is demonstrating on I believe this is a 10-inch mirror, how to grind and polish. He did take his jacket off. He still has his tie and he still has his vest, but that's how they worked. They didn't dress down like we do these days. And here he is measuring, taking a look at the mirror surface. And this is still how we make them. And this group of dedicated amateur astronomers would start going to observing fields to look and notice the cars back then. So here they are at a farmer's field. I think it's one of the owners here, and they would set up scopes. But they discovered that it's much better to be on a hilltop. So they started going to hilltops and actually camping out with their homemade telescopes. Here they are in Mount Ephraim, which is a much higher hill, and the viewing must have been better because they kept going back to that spot. Had to share it with the cows. Here they are at Westminster observing in 1921. And Mount Ephraim again, 1921. This is Frank Whitney, one of the original founders of Stellafane, telescope he made. And then they went on to Hawks Mountain, another place they observed from. They had plenty of firewood. Hawks Mountain, Porter was asked to do some surveying work. So they built this tower to set the surveying points, and they had a plaque made, which is still there, by the way. And so this spot was occupied in 1875. Primary triangulation of the survey of the United States. Notice he threw in what a telescope mirror looks like in a Foucault tester. He put that in practically everything, even though it had nothing to do with the surveying, but they observed from there. That plaque is still there, by the way. Oscar Fulham with a telescope he made. Hawks observing. And it was just an interesting crowd. So finally, in 1922, all of them completed their telescopes and they entered a fair. And they all won prizes because people were astounded. No one had ever seen anything like this. There was no amateur astronomy in the United States back then. So here they are. Most people are bringing cows and goats and some sewing material. These guys brought telescopes, let people look through them, and the fame spread wide and far and said, where did this come from? How do we do this? So they decided, since it was such a hit, that they would make this permanent. And Porter bought some land. They were tired of going to all these different places. Porter had bought some land on Breezy Hill, just outside Springfield. Okay. And he started inviting people up there. And he also he had quite a humor. So here he is. And this is a little bit of humor, but also shows you what he thought of telescopes. Let's see if we can get this damn thing together. 7 p.m. Hurry, I got to catch that moon. 9 p.m. Now for a nice long look at about 400 magnifications. 9:01 p.m. Hell, what an image. What it looked like. And he takes an axe and destroys the telescope. I mean, I don't know if that's a true parable or a story, but he was particular. His mirrors had to come out well. And that stood him in good place later on in life when he was invited to help build a 200-inch because of his professionalism. So here he is on Breezy Hill, what became the Stellafane site. And I think that's maybe Oscar. And they're looking at where they're going to set up for observing instead of going to all these different places. And from the top of Breezy Hill, you can see Mount Ascutney. If you've been to Stellafane, you'll know what I mean. But he made paintings everywhere. So the first thing was a little shack that was up there they did observing from. But that was certainly not going to be enough if they were going to have a crowd of people. And people were interested enough to want to build something. So they got together, they're in Breezy Hill, and they decided they're going to build a clubhouse on top of Breezy Hill, and that's where they're going to do all their observing from. And here is Porter down here. So they're clearing the site. Notice the antique, they're making a road here. And they started the fall of 22, and this is the spring of 23. And you can see the initial, it's called a pink, and I'll explain that why later. But here they are, finish it off with the roof. And here it is when, just before the windows were put in and the roof is completed. And here is a painting of Porter of the pink. The reason it's called a pink is they ran out of money. So they looked for donations for paint. So most buildings are not painted pink. What they donated to him was white and red paint and a few other colors. So they just mixed it all together. It came out hot pink, and that's what remains now. Now it's an icon, so we'll never change the color. And they included that the heavens declare the glory of God, that's been put on it. And notice the car back then. So here it is, December 7th, 1923, when he did that. 23, 24, they added a porch in the back, and the following year, notice the telescopes. And inside the pink, different telescopes, different mounts. This is where they got together. They had a fireplace, they could cook, survive the night well, and upstairs, there is a place to bunk out. It's called a bunkhouse. So here it is. I think this is 1925, probably, and it shows you what it was like. They didn't have color photographs back then, but it's hot pink. And at first, people were a little surprised. After a while, it grew on people. Now it'll never be changed. We work hard to make sure it stays the same color. Here it is around 1925. And that's Russell Porter there with a straw hat, typical of the mid-20s. This is transit scope, by the way, that he used to do timekeeping. And it got a reputation for mentoring. So here's a young man, and they brought people up and they taught him how to make telescopes. And they inspired lots of people to go into profession of either engineering or astronomy or amateur astronomy. So here are the original founders some years later. They got together. And, you know, you have to fix the road. They're still wearing a tie. They had class back then. They really did. So again, humor. So he has, at Stellafane, we have a whole collection of his cartoons and paintings, and again, a lot of his ones of Indians and Eskimos and landscaper in the National Archives now. So here they are looking at a comet, and they're discussing the comet. Now they're arguing over the comet. So they get into a fight about the comet, telescope's destroyed, but they become friends again and just look at the comet. His view of humor. So Porter's fame at telescope making spread across the country because people heard about it and wanted to partake. So here is Ingalls. He was an editor for Scientific American. And in 1924, he invited Porter to go to New York City because he wanted to learn about telescope making. Then Porter invited him to come to Stellafane the following year. And here is a different mount that Porter invented called a Springfield mount, where the eyepiece is here and the scope revolves, but you don't have to move your head because it's always in one place. It's still called a Springfield mount. So Ingalls was impressed by all of this, enough so, this is in later years when they got together, enough so that Scientific American, November 1925, cover article was on telescope making and what the people in Springfield were doing. And here is the article. The heavens are clear, the glory of God. Our group of enthusiasts learned to make telescopes and become amateur astronomers. This hit the country like a bomb. All of a sudden, everyone in the country who is scientifically literate and reading Scientific American, which was important back then, every university had it, colleges had it, and people who were interested in astronomy got this issue. And all of a sudden, people realized we don't have to spend 2 years' salary to buy a telescope. These people are doing it dirt cheap. So that's what started off the field of amateur astronomy. And now that people could make telescopes and people started doing it, follow the instructions, it spread like wildfire across the country. In fact, what happened was there was such demand that people complained that there was no place to buy equipment. So the people in Springfield decided to make kits up and would just sell them at cost. So all of a sudden they were swamped with people who wanted to buy kits for telescope making. And that included, a 6-inch or an 8-inch blank. It included the grits, the polished material, which back then was rouge, and instructions. So here they got requests from, according to the records, from Tasmania, South America, basically all around the world to send these mirror making kits. What ended up happening was, because of this, Ingalls basically convinced Porter that they should put a book together to teach people how to make telescopes. So it was amateur telescope making, part 1, mirror making, mounting, part 2, and there was material from others like the Northern Ireland, silvering. They didn't have aluminizing back then, and telescope mounting from automobile parts that are discarded. Anyone can make a telescope. These books were sellouts. 3,400 copies printed and was sold out very quickly. Here they are fixing the roof and expanding the clubhouse. There's now a kitchen area that's separate that was built at that time. And they had a sundial back then as well, I'm sure from Porter's multiple designs. That's still there, by the way. And here's the convention in 1926. After the publication, people started coming. Porter. 1927. Again, everyone wore a shirt and tie. This is what amazes me. People were well dressed back then. This one is 1929, a photograph. And here's the polar reflecting telescope that he originally designed for way back in Port Clyde in Maine, but he took the mirrors, and I don't think he ever finished it there, and they decided to build a similar scope in Breezy Hill. Here is, Porter had vast ambitions. Here is Porter's idea of what the Porter telescope, indoor telescope would be. It's rather dramatic, right? Here's what it ended up being, a little more down to earth, but I like his vision. I have to say, he thought big. So here is, and the whole purpose of this, it was finished in 1930, was he had a 16-inch, remember those 16 inches he bought? A 16-inch flat that would direct light to a parabolic mirror that would go through a hole through the flat. And on the inside, I'll show you the inside later, you'd sit in the comfort of, Vermont winters can be pretty brutal. So you'd sit on the inside and observe the sky, never set foot outside. I can relate to someone like that. Here they are building the gears and the main polar axle for this at James and Lamson. it doesn't help that you work for a company that makes the most precise skiers in the world, you know? So here they are bringing parts up to the top of Breezy Hill. They built the out of cement, the base, and they're going to slide this incredibly heavy piece, the polar axle, up there, getting it in position. I kind of, you know, basically get a bunch of slaves and you get an observatory together. Phil can relate to that since I turned him and Mike into slaves for my observatory.
That's true.
So I didn't make that idea. I'm just stealing the idea from the original Stellafaners. So here they are sliding the polar axle up there. And from the top of the tower that's there, you can see it looking down. And here is the 16-inch mirror with the hole in it. And not sure what and here is the parabolic mirror. So these are the ones that go there. And here you are on the inside. Here's the eyepiece. You look down that eyepiece and you just crank that around till you find what you want to look at in the sky. Pretty ambitious for 1930, if you think about it. Still in use today. 1930s convention. It slowly gets bigger and bigger and bigger. People started getting ambitious. Here's Ralph Patton from Rhode Island, 1930. Telescope he dragged up there. A portable telescope attached to a car. Just pull over and start observing. Here's his garden telescope, which was patented, and he sold many of them, mostly to rich people across the country, but that's how they finance some stuff. And basically, it's a eyepiece here, a flat, and your parabolic mirror here. They were called garden telescopes. People would leave it in their garden and just observe whenever they want. Here he is. He was well ahead of his time on many things. So here they are with a portable telescope looking at solar projection. So you can look at sunspots. Okay. He was on that way before we ever thought about it. Viewing Venus in daylight. They did that. Imaging, 1930. Put a camera at the back of a Richfield telescope. Here's Porter discussing some things at Stellafane. So 1929 came around, and Hale, who built the Mount Wilson and built Mount Palomar, wanted to build the world's biggest telescope, the 200-inch. He already done the 100-inch, and you know, once you have a 100-inch, you need 200 inches. I can relate to that as well. So he immediately started making plans for a 200-inch, but he needed quality engineers. Who best to ask than someone like Russell Porter? He knew how to design. He was an engineer. He knew how to make mirrors. And he kind of set the country, because of his pioneering work and getting people interested in astronomy and building telescopes. Money was no longer an object for Hale. He was able to get money to build a 200-inch. So in 1929, he invited Porter to come to California and discuss becoming part of the engineering team for the 200-inch telescope. And he made that into a road trip and stopped at different places along the way. Pikes Peak, Petrified Forest, and here's his California house that he first rented, then he bought a place. Actually, that's the one he did buy. So here is at Mount Wilson with his wife in 1929. And again, he'd go along and he would do funny drawings and paintings of what he saw. And they're crossing apparently Death Valley, and the caption is "Hurry up, it's awful hot." So here he is with a visit to Mount Wilson. These are pictures he did. I'm assuming he took the pictures, but there was in his collection. Here's the 100-inch hooker, which, by the way, I've looked through. It's an amazing sight. Here's the 60-inch in Mount Wilson. So he got engineering ideas there. And here's Hale, who basically was the financier and the brains behind Mount Wilson and Mount Palomar. And here's a sketch that Porter did of Hale in front of the 200-inch when it was completed. His paintings are famous. So, site survey for the new 200-inch. This is 1930, I believe. Got a bunch of workers looking around. They decided on the site. Now they have to figure out where they're going to actually put the telescope. And Porter had this 4-inch telescope from the astrophysics department of Caltech, where he was assigned to. And 1931, he set the scope up in different places to decide where was the best spot to put the 200-inch. Site was finally chosen. In fact, he's making measurements right there. So here is Porter's drawings of the site for the 200-inch. His drawings are just amazing. Here was his initial design by Porter, and this one was not accepted. It's a little clunky. It's kind of a square inside a rather huge tinker toy surrounding it, and with a gear that's exposed. Anyways, they decided that wasn't the right one. He went back to the drawing board and came up with this with other engineers. This one probably looks a lot more familiar because this is the final design. Here's Russell Porter at Caltech. His paintings of the and drawings, architectural drawings of the telescope are amazing. And these were used to help design the scope. So they're quite accurate. Notice this is the 200-inch scope, the mirror, the observing cage, got a little person inside of it right there. And the scope would swing as far as you could see Polaris because of the horseshoe. And you can go down south and you get into the cage from this spot here. So these were all these concept drawings of how it would come together, and the dome itself. The 200-inch looking from the east. I have a couple of copies of these in my observatory because they're pretty inspirational. And hopefully my scope will someday grow up to be bigger. Detailed drawings as well. Here are the mirror supports. Okay, he did detailed drawings so the engineers and the manufacturers could make the parts that were needed. Here is the horseshoe on oil pads, so it was frictionless. Here is the south side. Notice you could walk inside those tubes. He put detailed drawings on everything so you could see how exactly it was made. Looking from the south, looking from the north, and looking from the south again. Sketch of the 200-inch. Here is what it would look like sitting in the cage, which of course Hubble did for many a night. You would guide there and take in the image plate, the prime focus was the film plate was right there. Here is before they built it, they had to build a 1/10 scale model. And here's at Caltech a 1/10 scale model that Porter designed and built so they could test it out and make sure it actually would work the way they said it was going to work before they spent all the money to build it for real. He took trips to the countryside and would make drawings. The cars are getting a little more modern. Here is the 200-inch. I mean, they started building the mechanical parts. The mirror was cast in New York at Corning. The first one cracked. The second edition survived and made it to California. Here it is, the 200-inch diameter telescope putting on its side, being brought in. A little bit of excitement. And you can see now the 200-inch and the back end was lightweighted. And they're lowering it into the lens grinding machine. Here is the grinding machine. Boy, I wish I had one of those. We could build a much bigger one. So anyways, this was their lens grinding machine. And the mirror was down at the bottom here. Now, again, he has quite a sense of humor. So in his spare time, he devised a way that you could grind your own telescope with very little effort. So you basically sit here and sleep. Your heartbeat would be amplified, and that would run a motor, and that would automatically throw the carbo onto the mirror. So it would grind, and this would move back and forth by breathing, moving this and this Rube Goldberg device with a broomstick, and would move the mirror back and forth and be ground while you're sleeping. Great idea. Here is the coelostat for the sun, also designed at Caltech by him. And I didn't realize this till I dug into his life. He was one of the designers for the Griffith Observatory, which of course is not used for visual observing anymore, although I believe they still have telescopes here, and inside here is now a planetarium. But it was originally designed as an observatory, but as LA got bigger and bigger and the light pollution got worse and worse, it's no longer used as an observatory except for teaching purposes and a planetarium. But he was and that it's just a classic neoclassic design. I should have realized it was Porter just by the way it's designed. Here's when they were building the at Caltech, the building so they could grind the mirror. Oscar Marshall was one of the people at Jones and Lamson who he convinced to go with him, and he's working on a lathe making parts. Oscar Marshall in 1921, one of his first telescopes that he built. And then Russell Porter, being Russell Porter, throughout his stay at Caltech, here he is here, and this is one of his friends, and they're teaching all these grad students how to make a telescope, okay? So he really passed on his knowledge to everyone he met. Caltech portrait of him. Stellafane in the 1930s, even though he was now fully employed by Caltech for the Hale telescope, he went back every year and basically kept it alive and would go to every convention. So here he is, 1930. But you go back to California, large lathe making a 3,000-pound part. That's a lathe. Now, later in life, I think it was 1947, yeah, he was brought up to the cage out of respect to show him how this is shortly after the Hale telescope finally saw first light. And he is admiring his work. That's a 20-year effort. He came back for the 32 eclipse in Conway, in New Hampshire. Here he is setting up equipment so they could photograph the eclipse. This is just the camera to make sure he's at the right spot. Equipment set up. Bigger telescope set up. And they had the Franklin Institute back then, and others come up to see the eclipse. Notice the equipment.
Mario, can you speak up a bit?
Oh, sure. Sorry, can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
So 1932 convention. 1932 camping. People, again, look at the cars, they're getting a little more modern, but this is the camping field and observing field at Stellafane. The eclipse field. They went out to see the eclipse. I think that was just after the Stellafane. Yeah, here is Russell Porter and his wife. And Porter kept in touch with everyone from Vermont and Boston and people, and he would send letters back and forth. So here he is, and of course he has to use his drawings. He's saying Happy New Year to you fellows. Here he is waving to the people in Vermont, and he would send a letter. I mean, these are all heirlooms. 1934 eclipse, and just slowly getting bigger and bigger. And here, he's in here. I think that, I'm not sure. Anyways, he's in there. 1936, 1936 convention. This is Allentown Group. They took a picture with them. Here's Porter. And this is from Pennsylvania. Then the war came, and there were no conventions from 41 to 45 for obvious reasons. In fact, Porter was recruited. They had to stop work on the 200-inch. He was recruited to go to Washington, and his job was to make prisms and flats for the war effort and teach other people how to do it. So he would work in Washington, D.C., making those and teach others how to do that. Then when the war ended, Stellafane began again, and he went back. And also went back, of course, to California and finished up the scope. So here's 1954. There's a gap there. Porter died 1949. Membership without his leadership and inspiration started dwindling. They were down to only 16 members by 1953, and there was no convention that year. People were afraid this was just going to die out. Now come to the rescue the amateur telescope makers of Boston. They wanted to resurrect this. So the ATMOB agreed to, if they would, Springfield would host the convention, they would do the publicity, put up the money, tickets, program, and that year 250 people came. And it's never looked back since. So the ATMOB saved Stellafane. So here's the 54 convention, but 250 people came to that meeting. At night, 1959, one of the luminaries of the ATMOB, that's him right there. 65 Tuthill 20-inch scope, at the time one of the largest ever there. Paul Vallely, one of my mentors, in 68. My first convention was 59, and it was brought up by Paul Vallely. And Scott Houston, who used to write an article for Sky and Telescope. There's a couple of landmarks made out to Scott Houston at Stellafane. And here is modern day Stellafane. So here's setting up for the evening festivities. People line up, it's kind of a bowl that goes all the way around 180 degrees. And I'll be up front here, being the MC. The only thing is, I don't see anyone in a suit and tie. It really is a shame. We've gone downhill as a club. Here it is, night. It's still a nice observing site. Some light pollution at a distance, but it's not bad at all. Certainly a lot better than we have in Gloucester. Here's a photo by Dennis DeChico from Sky and Tel. You can see the Milky Way, the Porter scope, the clubhouse, and now we have other scopes further down the hill as well. And he caught a Perseid. So I believe that's my end. So I'll stop there for questions. If you haven't been to Stellafane, this is the year to do it. It's 100th year anniversary, and it's going to be quite a time.
Thank you, Mario.
All right, thank you, Mario.
Yes, indeed.
Hey, do they have accommodations up there?
The best thing to do is to camp. Okay, I camp out every year.
What it
My
looked like.
grandkids camp out with me. My kids camp out. But there are hotels nearby. But I mean, don't forget, the whole purpose of this is to look through telescopes at night and to judge them and to observe all night. So you can't do that from a hotel room. But if you just want to be an armchair astronomer and come for the talks, yes, there are hotels there, but you better book soon because people have to book hotels like up to 20 miles away because they all get booked.
And what's the date?
This year it's August 6th. One sec. It's the third weekend of, it's always new moon. Hold on.
There goes our speaker.
Ah,
I'm going to stop
I
this.
can give
share.
you the exact date before I give you misinformation. August 17th through the 20th, Thursday to Sunday. Most people come Friday to Sunday.
Thank you.
All right, Mario. Was Porter wearing a suit and tie when he was building an igloo?
That I don't know. I don't have a photograph of him in the
That
article.
would be impressive.
That it would.
But I am going to wear a suit, tie, white shirt when I make believe I'm Porter.
Period, correct, no doubt. Got to get an old car.
Well, that's
Mario used all the old car parts for his observatory in Gloucester.
Gotta get yourself a straw hat, Mario.
right.
Part of the look. It's really nice. I am amazed at everything this guy accomplished in his life. I really am. It's astounding.
It is truly amazing. Arctic explorer, surveyor,
Architect.
started the whole field of amateur astronomy in the country, taught everyone in the country how to make telescopes, and then went on to build the world's biggest, at the time, the world's biggest telescope, the 200-inch. I mean, what more can you accomplish in life? Oh, and the art colony, which is still in Port Clyde, Maine.
Oh, that's neat. Very cool.
He
Do you have any
traveled an awful-
questions in the room? I don't think so. Any more questions online?
Nope,
traveled-
not for me.
he traveled an
Compliments,
awful lot.
encomiums, testimonials.
Thanks, Mario, it was really good.
Thanks, Mario.
Mario, that was great.
Appreciate it. That was
Thank you,
really good.
Mario.
Really, really enjoyed that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And as always, Michael, thank you for inviting me.
All right, so next month,
There it is.
Whoa, that's
didn't mean
scary.
to do that to you. Next month, we have a guy, what's his name? Rick Howard. Rick Howard, who actually worked on in a senior level, the Webb telescope, developing the James Webb Space Telescope. He'll be here in person
Great.
because he thought it was important enough to be here in person. I appreciate that in the speaker. Thanks, everybody.
That a dig?
I'm going to hold back on my snide comments.
All right, thanks, Mario. All right, we're going to close the doors now and finish the pie.
Enjoy your pie, everybody. See you next
Thank
Thanks,
you very
everybody, for
much.
coming.
Have a great night, Mike. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.